He sat alone on the hospital garden bench, tie loosened, the kind of tired that money cannot fix. He watched sparrows argue over a crumb and wondered when he had last felt small in a good way, the way that makes a heart humble. A little girl in soft shoes and an oxygen tube stopped beside him. Her cheeks held the color of morning. She lifted a worn rabbit and said, almost like a secret, "Can I sit here?" He moved aside, and she smiled as if he had opened a window. Before we continue, don't forget to like and subscribe, so you won't miss the upcoming stories. For the next video, what kind of story do you love the most? Tell me in the comments. They sat in a kindly silence that did not ask for explanations. The fountain kept a slow beat. Leaves hummed above them as if the trees were practicing how to whisper. He was used to rooms where words arrived like shoes on marble, hard and quick. Here, even silence had soft hands. "My name is Lily," she said. The rabbit rested in her lap as if it had already heard the news and agreed with it. "He gets a new name each day. He likes adventure." "I'm Ethan," he answered. He let the rest of his life remain unintroduced. The longer version never sounded true when he said it aloud. Lily studied his face with the clear attention children give to constellations and hurt places. "You look like breakfast forgot you," she said. He smiled without meaning to. "I forget other things too." "Like smiling?" "Like believing the day can be kind," he said, and the words surprised him by how honest they were. From then on, the bench learned their weight. He came when the world pushed too hard and when it pushed less. He came when his uncle went upstairs for treatments and when he simply needed a corner that did not know the names people used to praise him. Lily arrived in a chair when her legs were tired and on her own feet when the light inside her body felt generous. She had a way of noticing small mercies and laying them gently on the moment between them. A cloud that looked like a teapot. A line of ants choosing cooperation over pride. The smell of toast coming from the cafeteria, pretending the whole garden was a kitchen where someone was always at home. She repeated the simple rules her nurse gave her, the kind that sound like a recipe for a good life. Eat what you can. Rest when the light turns soft. Breathe in a way that keeps the future open. He listened and realized his own days had forgotten these rules. He began to keep them, not as a strict promise, but as a friendly habit. A glass of water before long thoughts. A slower answer to a sharp message. A thank you set down on a counter with the same care one gives to a sleeping bird. He brought a book one afternoon, a gentle story about a village where nothing much happened except kindness and bread. Lily asked him to read the parts where no one was in danger. He found those parts easily. His voice learned to amble. She leaned back with her eyes half closed and traveled without moving. When he paused, she touched the woven bracelet on his wrist, a neat band the color of plain rope. "This looks like a lonely road," she said. The next day she brought a thread of soft blue and looped it through, making the band remember the sky. "Now it knows the way home," she said, satisfied. He had grown up believing that help wore large shoes and made announcements. Lily kept teaching him a smaller truth. Hold a cup with both hands so the warmth can do its work. Share the last piece of bread with a creature who expects nothing. Say the name of a nurse the way one says the name of a friend. He began to carry these ordinary lights into rooms that had never noticed them. The valet heard a please from a mouth that used to hurry. The cleaner saw someone wait while she finished her careful sweep. The barista received a note that said only thank you for this quiet cup, and it colored the whole counter for hours. Sometimes Lily asked questions that reached the tender places inside him and knocked politely. Why do people run if they are only going to sit down later? He did not know. Why does your forehead fold when the sky is pretty? He told her it was a map that forgot how to be simple. She nodded as if maps do that sometimes and it is nothing to be ashamed of. He avoided the story of the woman he had loved, not because it was unimportant, but because it had been mishandled. Pride had taken a seat where softness should have sat. One evening, when the sun set in that forgiving color that makes even old bricks look like new bread, he told Lily his shorter truth. There had been someone. He had let her go when family air turned thin. Lily did not scold or rescue. She patted the space between them. The bench is wide, she said, which was her way of saying regret and hope can share one seat if they behave. Leaves drifted like tiny boats. The fountain kept its gentle pulse. A volunteer in a cheerful vest watered the pots along the path and hummed something that soothed the dirt. The world was obedient to kindness in that garden. It did not fix illness or promise miracles. It simply agreed to be gentle where it could. Lily arrived one day with a knit cap and a smile that worked a little harder. Her nurse lingered, and the rabbit had lost a bit more fur. Lily announced that the rabbit's new name was Buttercup Captain, which sounded like a joke and also like courage. He opened the book to a chapter he had saved for a day that needed comfort. A kitchen window, a stew that never boiled over. Someone returned a borrowed bowl with a folded note inside. Lily listened as if every sentence were a bird that had come a long way and deserved the easiest branch. He brought tea in a small flask after that, honey in a jar that used to hold jam, and napkins folded the way the volunteer had taught him. He noticed how Lily watched him pour, as if the way one pours is a promise about other, larger things. He poured slowly. The steam rose like clean music. On a bright afternoon, the garden felt like a new bedspread. The air had been shaken out and left to settle without wrinkles. Lily asked if he believed in wishes that do not make noise. He said he wanted to. She nodded as if that counted. She told him that on rough nights she imagined the sun making a plan to return, and that simple thought walked her through the dark. He wrote the sentence in his mind and kept it there as a warm stone. He began to measure days by the bench. There was a time before the bench and a time after. He stopped attending to conversations that praised him for the size of what he owned. He started listening to how people placed cups on tables, how they said sorry to doors, how they greeted rain. His life did not flip like a coin, it turned like a page. Quietly, meaningfully. A nurse told him the garden had rules. No loud calls that yank someone from their thoughts. No racing that forgets the ground can be uneven. Leave the bench better than you found it. He loved the last rule. He began to carry a small cloth in his pocket and wiped crumbs so birds would not step in sticky sugar. He straightened a crooked plaque. He learned where the path held a wobble and warned the wheels of chairs with a gentle hand. Sometimes Lily slept while he read, not because the words were dull, but because peace can be a soft door. He watched her breathing find its rhythm and felt his own lungs agree. Her rabbit rested near her shoulder like a ship pulled into a quiet harbor. He understood then that love is not a rescue boat with lights and sirens. It is a steady lamp that keeps burning until morning remembers its job. Rain visited one evening, polite and silver. Lily tipped her face up for a few careful drops. "The sky is washing dishes," she said. He laughed. The nurse lifted a clear hood above her, and Lily allowed it without argument. She never argued with kindness. She only adjusted so everyone could stay well. He started to write unsent notes in his head. A hello to the woman he had loved long ago. A hope that her days were fed and her nights felt safe. He did not send anything, but the wish existed, and sometimes a wish is a seed that knows what to do without help. The bracelet gathered colors. Blue for returned sky, gray for storms that left without taking everything, white for the quiet parts of hope. Each thread made the simple band feel more like truth and less like decoration. He touched it when meetings tried to turn him into a version of himself that no longer fit. He brought bread for birds and found that generosity attracts witnesses. A child asked if the birds had names. He said they did not need them. They came when crumbs came and left when crumbs left, and that was enough of a story for any creature. The child nodded in the satisfied way of someone who has learned a rule that will hold. He noticed Lily did not order her days into good and bad. She greeted them like guests. Some stayed longer than they should. Some arrived early with flowers. She treated each with courtesy. On the days that hurt, she picked smaller goals. Sit in the sun for a while. Tell the rabbit a joke. Watch 3 birds land on the fence and pretend they are a choir. She never counted aloud. She simply let small victories line up in her pocket until they felt heavier than worry. A morning came that carried the scent of new soap. He reached the bench to find a paper crane resting on the slat, wings bravely open, a little uneven. A child had tried and almost succeeded. He set it upright and smiled. The fountain told its usual story. The leaves made the kind of shade that forgives harsh hours. He waited for the hush of soft shoes, for the squeak of the chair, for the rabbit to peek around the hedge. He poured tea and held the cup so the warmth rested in his palms. He waited while the tea cooled. He waited while the breeze folded a corner of the napkin and smoothed it again. He waited while a robin hopped close with the entitlement of someone who has been fed before and sees no reason to interrupt a tradition. He told himself that healing has its own timetable. He told himself that nurses could be late and still be excellent. He told himself that perhaps Lily had chosen a window seat today and lost track of time while counting violets on the bedspread. He told himself stories that walked him in circles. He rose and walked a few steps, then returned to the bench as if the bench might worry if left alone. He noticed the small curve her shoulder always pressed into the cushion, the way her shoes pointed a little inward when she sat very still, the careful place on the arm where she kept her rabbit so its ears would not fall into puddles. The bench held these secrets without showing off. The doors to the ward opened and closed in their gentle way, letting people through like waves, letting shells rest and then lifting them again. He moved toward the desk, passing the fern Lily liked to touch, passing the wall where children's paintings lined up in a parade of brave color. Boats that would not sink. Rainbows that did not ask permission from clouds. Smiling suns with eyelashes. At the desk, the nurse looked up. Her eyes softened the moment they found his face, the way eyes do when they have to be the kind of hands that hold breakable news. He set both palms on the counter so they would be steady. The garden sounds dimmed behind him as if someone had pressed pause on the day. He opened his mouth to ask, but a different sort of language was already in the room, the kind that uses breath and posture and the space between words. He understood much of it before a single sentence was spoken. The nurse came around the counter so they could be human beside human, not official, and petitioner. She placed a clean tissue on the smooth wood, not because she expected tears, but because kindness likes to arrive early. He knew then that the bench would remember someone even when the bench was empty. He knew that the garden would keep its slow rhythm even when his own rhythm faltered. He knew that the bracelet on his wrist would feel heavier and dearer because a small hand had taught it the meaning of color. The nurse spoke quietly, as if sound itself should walk softly. He listened in the way one listens to rain counting on the window. There was no drama, only care. The words came and did their work and asked for nothing except room to be heard. He breathed, because someone had taught him to. He stood upright, because someone had modeled gentleness with a spine of iron. He thanked the nurse for saying hard things in a soft voice. He looked down the hallway where doors knew both joy and sorrow and carried both without breaking. He turned back toward the garden because air was waiting there, and sunlight had a few more kindnesses to give before evening. He walked to the bench and sat where Lily had sat. He placed the rabbit on the arm where she always balanced it, ears forward, ready for stories. He did not try to build a speech out of pain. He let quiet do part of the lifting. The paper crane shifted its weight in a small breeze and remembered its courage. The fountain kept counting very slowly and promised to lose track soon, for his sake. He closed his eyes and spoke to the space beside him as if it were a friend who had simply stepped out of view. He told the space that the tea had cooled but could be warmed again. He told the space that the bread would be shared even if sparrows seemed entitled. He told the space that he had learned how to pour carefully and how to wait kindly and how to greet rain like a helper. He did not ask for anything. He offered news. He offered gratitude. He offered the quiet faith of a man who had been helped by a small teacher in soft shoes. The day moved forward in the modest way days do when they are carrying something precious. He rose at last and straightened the napkin and tied the blue thread on his bracelet so it would not fray. He set the rabbit upright, not like a guard, more like a companion. He brushed a crumb from the bench so the next person would find a clean welcome. Then, steady and slow, he walked toward the ward again. There were calls to make and hands to shake and forms to sign. There were also softer duties that paper does not list. Sit with the nurse who had to deliver gentle news. Thank the volunteer for watering the pots. Tell the robin that crumbs would return tomorrow. Promise the bench that it would not be alone. He knew this was not an ending that slammed a door. It was a doorway with a curtain, the kind that moves when someone enters and keeps moving for a while after, so a heart can follow without stumbling. He knew the garden would keep a seat for him whenever he needed to remember what he had learned here. He knew that the story he was inside now would need patience and small steps and a way to measure progress that did not require grand announcements. He laid his hand over the bracelet and felt the threads warm against his skin. Sky, storm, quiet hope. He breathed and let the breath travel a long road, in and out, the road that all living things share. He lifted his chin toward the light that still pooled in the trees. He listened to the world be kind where it could. Behind him, the bench waited with the simple loyalty of wood and cushion. Ahead of him, the hallway waited with the sober loyalty of care and duty. He stood between them, learning how to belong to both. He did not leave the garden right away. The world had shifted, but it had not fallen. The bench was still a bench. The sky still held its patient blue. He sat with the rabbit where Lily had taught him to sit, with both feet on the ground, with his hands calm and open. When at last he stood, he carried the rabbit the way one carries a story that will need telling again and again. The ward asked for signatures and soft answers. He gave both. He listened to the nurse speak of kindness funds and memorial paperwork that tried to be gentle and sometimes was. He thanked her by name. He told her the tea in the garden would be warm again tomorrow, and that she was welcome to it if the day ran out of comfort. Outside, the afternoon had softened its brightness. The volunteer in the cheerful vest watered the pots and gave him a look that asked nothing and said everything. He walked back to the bench, placed the rabbit on the arm, and tied the blue thread on his bracelet a little tighter. The thread did not make a sound, but he felt it answer. He took the long path out, the one that passes the wall of children's paintings and the spot where the fern leans toward the light. At the hospital door, the glass gave back his reflection and also something else, a trace of the man Lily had nudged him toward. He lifted his chin a little. He stepped through. He drove without music. Streets unspooled. The city kept its many small chores. A cyclist with a bright scarf paused at a crossing and smiled at a child. A baker swept a small army of crumbs into a pan and carried them out for birds. Life was still life, imperfect and determined. He felt strange inside it, like a person who had walked out of a warm room and was carrying that warm room under his coat. Night knew how to arrive. He made tea at home because tea had learned how to help. The kettle sang in a modest way. Steam lifted and remembered the shape of the air. He held the cup with both hands, exactly as he had been taught, and spoke a quiet promise to the kitchen. He would return to the garden. He would bring bread for the birds and a kind word for the nurses and a steady chair for whoever needed one. He would not let this become a story that stopped. It would be a road he walked, soft step by soft step. Sleep did not come quickly. He stood by the window and watched the dark settle into corners like a cat finding its place. He thought of the woman he had loved long ago, the one he did not send a message to. He let the thought be tender and unforced, as if holding a letter he was not ready to open, yet unwilling to put away. Morning was a softer teacher than night. He went back to the garden with a paper bag of bread ends and a thermos of tea. The bench looked like a familiar face in a crowd. He greeted it the way one greets a friend. He set the rabbit in its usual spot and broke bread with the practice of someone who hopes to be remembered for ordinary generosity. Birds came in their curious way, landed, hopped, leaned, and trusted. The fountain gave its slow counting again, and he let his breath keep time. The nurse from the desk found him there. She carried a small envelope and a kindness that did not require conversation. Inside the envelope lay a simple card from the social worker, a gentle note about a service the hospital planned for families who wanted to say goodbye together, and a time that would arrive soon. He thanked her and said he would be there, and that if anyone needed extra chairs carried, he knew how to carry chairs. He wandered the hospital after that, not snooping, not lost, only learning a place that had held so much. He saw a volunteer reading near the children's corner, voice soft and even, turning pages as if turning leaves. He saw a therapist guiding an old man's steps down a hall, counting with a tone that could balance a glass of water. He saw a cleaner pausing to straighten a crooked sign. He learned, yet again, that kindness enjoys quiet work. At the service, he stood under a ceiling that had learned the art of echo without sting. Candles were lit. Names were spoken and held in air long enough to be honored. He closed his eyes and placed Lily's name there, not as a fact, but as a light. He did not look around in search of anyone. He let the room be a room and the moment be the exact size it needed to be. After the gentle prayers and the silent minutes, he stepped into the atrium and felt the cool of the stone under his shoes. That was when he heard a voice he knew and did not know, a voice that arrived like a memory receiving new breath. Ethan. He turned. Claire stood near the window, a small bouquet of daisies in her hand. The light found her the way it always had. She did not wear jewelry or paint a smile she did not feel. She just stood there with the open face of someone who has learned to endure and to remain kind. They did not rush. They moved toward each other as people do when they are walking through a room filled with memories and would rather not spill any. When they were close enough to speak without effort, he said her name. It felt like taking a careful book off a shelf and opening it to a page that had never truly been lost. She told him she had been here for a while. She told him there were days she had seen him on the bench from a window and had not come down, not because she wished to avoid him, but because she had wanted the bench to do its work without interruption. She said that someone had told her about the bracelet with the threads, and she glanced at his wrist with a smile that carried many gentlenesses. He asked if she had the strength to talk about Lily. She nodded. They walked to the garden because chairs in the atrium felt like chairs for other kinds of conversations. The bench welcomed them with the polite loyalty of wood. They sat with a space between them that was not cold. The rabbit faced the path like a small sentinel who respected privacy. Claire spoke in the voice of a mother remembering the best parts. Lily loved clouds and the names of herbs and the idea that umbrellas are shared more than owned. Lily liked when rain sounded like applause on the window. Lily called her old rabbit by different names depending on the courage she needed that day. Lily believed that the birds in this garden were better at listening than most adults, and no one had the heart to disagree. He listened with his hands still and his breath even. Claire watched his face for signs of the old pride that had once made the air too thin for both of them. She saw none. The man beside her wore the same features, but the angles had changed, softened, as if time and patience had asked for room and been given it. There was a moment when the story narrowed. Claire looked at the rabbit and took a breath that had to travel a long distance. She said that there had been a time long ago when love had been real but complicated, when doors had been held closed by hands that meant well and did harm. She did not accuse. She did not absolve. She simply laid the truth down, flat and honest, like a cloth on a table before a meal. He nodded. He told her he had carried that cloth in his pocket for a very long time and that Lily had taught him how to unfold it without tearing it. He did not ask questions that would turn the moment into a courtroom. He did not reach for words that would try to fix what was already part of the earth. He said he was sorry in the manner of a man placing a stone exactly where it belongs on a grave, not to weigh something down, but to mark its place. Claire touched the blue thread on his bracelet with one fingertip, the way Lily used to. She liked you, Claire said. She told me the man on the garden bench made the world feel safe again. He closed his eyes, and the sentence went into him the way light goes into a leaf. They spoke of practical matters only briefly. There were forms to settle and donations the hospital would channel to families who needed meals and transport. Ethan found that his hands already knew the shape of what to do. He said he would help. Not because guilt demanded it, but because love had taught him to enjoy the work. They stood. The bench made that soft sound a cushion makes when kindness rises. They did not hug or linger too long. They left one another with a promise that did not require a calendar. Be well. Be gentle. If the garden calls, answer. He returned on many days after that. He read near the fountain. He learned the names of more nurses and volunteers. He brought pastries when he knew a long shift had eaten the last of someone's energy. He showed a new father where the quietest corner was so nervous hands could relax. He knotted the swing rope in the children's corner when it forgot how to hold. He fixed a loose arm on the bench with a small kit he carried in his pocket, the way a sailor carries a length of line just in case. One morning, he found a design sheet pinned to the notice board near the garden. A small group planned to refresh the space, add shade where summer burned too bright, repaint the railings, plant herbs that would make the air kind. He asked the volunteer how he could help and learned that gardens enjoy both money and hands. He brought both. Work began on a mild day when the wind took breaks instead of tantrums. He carried bags of soil, one at a time, refusing to rush. He learned the names of herbs Lily loved. Rosemary for memory. Thyme for patience. Mint for breath that tastes like hope. He planted each with quiet care. He watered the earth until it looked like it had taken a long drink and was no longer afraid. He placed small plaques where they would not boast. One near the bench said, simply, for those who wait with courage. Another near the herb bed said, kindness grows well in any weather. He did not add his name. He did not need a claim. He wanted arrivals to feel as if the garden had always known them. The garden changed without losing itself. New shade landed where it was needed. Birds tried new perches and approved. Children mapped new routes between flower beds and found that the paths were wider and kinder to wheels. The fountain kept its slow counting but sounded more content, like water after a good nap. Claire visited on a cool evening with a small bouquet and a face that could carry both sorrow and thankfulness without spilling. They walked the new path without hurry. She touched the rosemary and smiled, then the thyme and smiled again. She would have liked this, she said. He nodded. She does, he answered, and it did not feel like pretense. They reached the bench. He had asked a craftsperson to make a small brass charm in the shape of a rabbit's ear, simple and plain. It hung from the arm under the curve where Lily once rested her hand. Claire noticed and covered the charm with her palm for a moment. The gesture did not try to summon the past. It blessed the present. They sat together and shared a quiet that did not pinch. They spoke about the garden's future as if planning a gentle holiday for a beloved relative. More herbs in spring. A bird bath in the corner that catches light. A small box where people can leave a note for someone they miss and take a note from someone they have never met. Claire said she would bring a stack of paper. Ethan said he would bring pencils sharpened kindly, tips not so sharp they could wound. He went home later through streets that knew him now. He stopped by the bakery and asked for the end pieces that would be thrown away. The baker smiled and filled a bag without charge. He left a paper cup of coffee on the counter with a folded napkin beside it, a small thank you for the kindness that keeps kitchens warm. The hospital garden earned a name. Not a grand title with dates and titles and carved moods. A simple sign near the gate said Lily's Garden in letters that did not try to be fancy. People read it the way one reads a friend's name on a mailbox. Some asked who Lily was. The nurses said she liked clouds and rabbits and the sound of rain on windows. That was enough. News has its own way of traveling. Families from other wards began to bring their waiting here. A grandmother in a soft scarf knit on the bench with hands like competent weather. A student came to study and found that pages turned with less anxiety when birds auditioned nearby. A security guard ate his sandwich at the herb bed and learned to break mint with his fingers and breathe through his nose. It became a place where ordinary time sat down and remembered how to be kind. Ethan learned to show up without making a show of it. He arrived early with a cloth to wipe dew, left late with empty cups that did not belong in flower beds. He tightened a screw that loosened because time has that habit. He talked with the volunteer about shade and frost and which flowers like to be surprised by morning sun. His suit lived more in closets now. His shirts decided to enjoy gentle wrinkles. His phone learned to wait. He still thought of Claire in a way that was careful and good. Sometimes they crossed paths in the garden. They did not pretend nothing had happened in the old days. They did not perform the past. They let it sit in the shade like an elderly relative who is best cared for by comfort and space. They spoke about simple things. The way time keeps its courage through cold. How birds remember a generous hand. How a bench can learn the shapes of many griefs and still be welcoming. On a day that smelled faintly of rain and bread, Ethan carried a small crate of new plants along the path and saw a child sitting alone on the bench. The child stared at the bracelet on his wrist and then at the rabbit charm and then at the herb bed as if the world was releasing secrets slowly enough to be understood. The child's parents stood nearby, eyes tired but kind. Ethan set down the crate and asked if they needed anything. The parents said they were waiting for a test and the waiting had sharp teeth. He brought tea. He brought bread. He brought the old wisdom Lily had taught him. Breathe in a way that keeps the future open. Rest when the light turns soft. Be brave in small ways first. He did not try to be a hero. He did not try to be a saint. He let the garden do its work and offered his hands. The hands had learned to pour without spilling, to knot rope so it could trust itself, to tie a ribbon in a way that allows a box to breathe. The hands had learned to carry lilies to places where lilies look like courage. He visited the cemetery with Claire when the daisies were tall. They stood by a small stone and spoke of the day the sign had gone up at the garden gate. They spoke of the child with the test, who had left with a rabbit sticker and a smile that could lift a corner of winter. They spoke of the nurse who cried and then laughed and then cried again because the herb bed had remembered her grandmother's soup. They left lilies in a jar and a paper crane sealed under a little clear shell so rain could make a sound without making a mess. They did not stay long. They did not need to. Grief had learned to become a river that did not flood, a river that moved through the day and fed the soil and then went on. They walked away slowly and let the path hold their steps the way practiced paths do. At home, he kept a small box by the door for notes. He did not call it a shrine. He called it a box for good news. When a day kept its promise to be kind, he wrote it down on the back of a receipt or a bread bag tag and let the box hold it. The notes were not poetry, but they were honest. The swing held. The mint lived. A stranger laughed and sounded like someone I used to know. The sky washed dishes. The bench said welcome. He sometimes woke at night and felt the old ache pacing the room, but the ache did not frighten him now. He gave it water. He walked it to the window. He told it what the garden would be doing in the morning. He told it about birds that do not argue, about rosemary that does not forget, about time that goes on and on. He told it about Lily sitting down beside him and asking a question that opened a window in his chest. The ache listened and settled. Time moved, polite and steady. The bracelet wore its threads like a small flag. Sky. Storm. Quiet hope. He kept adding colors as life taught him new names for kindness. He added a soft green for seedlings that found their courage. He added a deep brown for soil that accepted what fell and made something new. He added a pale gold for evenings when the garden held more peace than he had felt since he was young. He wrote a sentence for the plaque at the garden gate, not a sermon, not an announcement, only a truth that had earned its right to be public. Kindness does not ask who you are, it simply sits beside you. The letters were engraved in a hand that looked human rather than perfect. People read it and felt less alone. On the anniversary of the day the rabbit had asked to sit, Ethan arrived early with fresh lilies and a loaf of bread still warm. He arranged the flowers in a green jar that caught the morning light and made it playful on the table. He broke the bread into soft pieces and welcomed the birds like neighbors. He poured tea and breathed in a way that gave his ribs more space. The garden held families and nurses and cleaners and volunteers and the quiet army of people who keep hope staffed. He looked at them with the gratitude one reserves for a language that has finally been learned. Claire arrived with daisies. They stood near the herb bed and said nothing for a while. The wind moved through rosemary and made it speak in the voice of memory. Time answered, patient as ever. Mint chimed in with the brave brightness of breath. Ethan sat on the bench when the sun tilted and left a generous stripe of shade. He placed the rabbit charm in his palm and closed his fingers around it the way one holds a tiny, perfect truth. He did not try to summon the past. He let the present be sufficient. He looked at the sky and said thank you for returning. He looked at the ground and said thank you for holding. When he stood to go, he left the bench as he always did, a little cleaner than he found it, a little more ready for the next soul who would need an easy chair in a hard hour. He walked the path at a pace that would not frighten birds. He carried the empty cup and the bag that had held bread and a quiet he would later pour into whatever work the day asked for. At the gate he paused and read the sign again, as if to check that the world had not changed the words in the night. Lily's garden. He touched the metal gently and then let his hand fall to his side. He did not feel brave or noble. He felt human in the good way, the way that makes a heart humble and leaves room for others to sit. He crossed the street and joined the city the way a river joins the sea, without drama, with purpose. He walked toward whatever needed mending. A loose screw. A short fence. A sharp tone that could be softened. He knew what to do. He had been taught by a teacher who sat small and shone large. As evening spread the good kind of gold across windows and leaves, he returned once more to the garden path in his mind. He saw the bench, the fountain, the birds who do not argue about crumbs, the herb bed where memory and patience and breath live together. He thought of the day a little girl stood beside him and asked a simple question that turned his life the way a page turns under a gentle hand. That night, the city slept the way tired cities do when kindness has been busy. He stood at his window and watched the lights steady themselves in their frames. He placed a note in the box by the door. It said only this: a stranger sat beside me today, and the world felt safe. He closed the lid and smoothed the cloth.